Welcome, everyone. I'm Akiva Goldman, director and founder of Goldman and Associates. Our main focus is family law, and today we're going to dive into a very important issue: the interface between divorce and the marital home. Divorce brings a lot of tough decisions, and one of them is what to do with the house. Do we sell it? Do we keep it? Who keeps it? How do we do it? These are questions that we deal with all the time in real estate and legal practice. But today we're going to get some insight from real estate experts to help people navigate these situations every day. Today I'm joined by Brett Knybel, a real estate professional, and he has seen firsthand how divorce affects home sales, property values, even negotiation. Thank you, Brett, for joining us at this time. Before we jump in, Brett, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're located, and the kind of work you do?
Well, hi, everybody. I'm Brett Knybel. I'm excited to be here today, and thanks for inviting me on the show. A couple of things that I found to be a little bit interesting, a little bit about myself for you guys is I've been practicing real estate for a little over a decade now. I spent a lot of time in Macomb, St. Clair, and in Oakland counties. Seems to be where I'm kind of from. I originally grew up in New Baltimore, Michigan, so kind of that's where my stomping grounds that's where I'm most known at, I guess you would say. In
Good.
real estate, I've really focused a specialty over the years of just helping people just buy and sell real estate. And those first time home buyers become married with kids. And unfortunately, divorce does happen sometimes. So we find ourselves in a lot of these mixed up divorce situations. And with that kind of experience, I think we're in the same arena playing in the same field. So I think we can talk a little bit about something of value for everybody today.
Well, I think so. And obviously, if you or someone you know out there in the listening audience is going through this, this is a conversation you need to hear. So let's get started. Brett, let me ask you this. When it comes to real estate transactions in a divorce, you got two sides to it. Do you think it's important for the husband and wife who are battling over the house, should they be represented by separate real estate agents like they're represented by separate lawyers?
Well, not necessarily. I don't find that to be beneficial. I think one of the most important things for anybody that's going to be getting a divorce should be sitting down and thinking about doing is actually hiring a private appraisal individually. And it would probably be in the best interest of each attorney to have that happen for, two spouses divorcing. Each attorney should suggest quickly that they, go ahead and get private appraisal completed. If they do not, what happens is we have valuations, dark arguments quite often where one person thinks it's worth more, the other one thinks it's worth less. And then you run into the situation where who's keeping the house and who's not. So the one who's keeping the house typically wants a different valuation than the person who's being pushed out. So what do we kind of run into in that instance? So those are some of the things that we have to, really decipher going forward with that.
That's interesting. So that's a little bit different because I'll bet that in a non-divorce situation, it's the realtor that really runs the point on what we should list the house at. But what you're saying
Well,
now in this situation, sometimes we want to get a third party's opinion so that nobody accuses anybody of taking sides.
Well, a lot of times real estate is a very relational business, and I don't know so much on the attorney side in terms of relational with your clients. You get your clients, usually they're typically pretty stressed, pretty in an emotional state of mind. We get those same people when they come to us, but a lot of times people choose a real estate agent based on who they know, like, and trust. And sometimes if there's perceived a different perception that if one of the divorcing spouses has a closer relationship, that there could be some, unfair advantages that are taking place against the other party. So having that private appraisal completed by each of them seems to be the quickest and most efficient way to get an agreed upon value. And you just lay that in the realtor's lap. And if you trust that person that's ready to get it rock and rolling, it makes the most sense to just have the one person that the family trusts to have done, get the property sold quickly.
Interesting. But let me ask you this though, as a follow-up question. Does an appraiser use different tools to determine value than you would use if they just came
No,
straight up
it's
to you?
it's an unnecessary expense. It's just a more official report. I shouldn't say unnecessary. It's an expense no matter what, but an appraiser, unlike a realtor and or like myself, an associate broker, we can give what are called broker price opinions. They just don't seem to carry the same weight as an appraisal that is completed by a licensed real estate appraiser has. There's just a different level of licensing that's there. So I'm sure as you have seen, as you get into the courtrooms, appraisal is, on anything, any type of assets, even when you're dealing with,
Sure.
some of these higher level divorce cases with significant assets with business valuations and that you need somebody that you need to determine a true value, and having two separate, appraisals completed gives everybody kind of a range of where you're going to land.
And as a realtor, if you're faced with two different values, is your agenda generally to say, hey, we got a high and a low, let's list it in the middle? Is that what we're doing?
No, I sometimes there's even necessary to have a third appraisal completed.
Wow.
And again, it gets expensive, but that's where you have to have that real estate conversation. And hopefully if you're going through divorce, you're using a trusted expert that's dealt with divorce in the past and has sold property before to really come up with a true value there. Because I can have three appraisers go to the exact same house and we can get three different valuations. We could have a house that's worth someone says it's worth 500, someone says it's worth 550, someone says it's worth 610. Really, it's all over the map. They use the same data, but an appraisal is nothing more than an opinion of value. At the end of the day, the value is what a buyer is willing to pay. So
Right.
no matter what we put on there, it just comes, that's the game we're playing. So
Very interesting. Now, I take it there are certain things you want to do in preparation that perhaps you might recommend to clients before they list their marital home during a divorce. What might some of those things be?
understand that the house is now a commodity and there's no one understands the emotional ties that you understand to
What
the
a
house.
great point. Because
Yeah, so
people get attached, right? And all of a sudden they think it's worth so much more because that's where their kids grew up and that's where they had all this fun. But it is really just a commodity, isn't it?
it's truly a commodity. Not everybody understands the memories and the relationships and the neighbors and marking the kids' heights in the garage. All of those memories are so fond, and that's what makes a house a home. And that's something that we all, we struggle with when we deal with divorcing clients. They typically run into the situation where somebody's super emotionally attached, and the property value is their perception of they are the highest bidder for their home every single time, at least one of the spouses is, and they just price it way too high. So my suggestions is to one, have your trusted real estate expert come through and really point out the things that need to happen. If it's not an amicable divorce, which not all of them are, a lot of times you run into situations where, let's say that the one of the spouses is just being a little facetious. And we have seen things where we're letting dogs just not go outside. We have seen in divorce cases, we've seen in the house a train wreck. We've seen people making sure it smells bad, cooking, anything to cause any kind of pain or not want to sell the house. It has to be a mutual decision. Sometimes one spouse just doesn't want the divorce. And I'm sure you guys experience that as well, right? I mean, somebody files, the other one doesn't want to, and no matter what, it's going to happen, but they tried to sabotage the sale. So
Well,
you got to get over the sabotaging of the sale. Other than that, it's really collectively coming together and saying, hey, some of these things need to be improved upon. A lot of times in divorce cases, we start to see true neglect to a property. The roof's got a leak. There's something wrong with the plumbing. This bathroom shower hasn't been working. There's stains on this carpet that needs to be replaced. Somebody punched a hole in these three doors in this wall. It just doesn't give. You're selling a commodity. If you were going to sell your car, you'd probably take it for a wash and have it cleaned on the inside, right? So
right.
those are the types of things that need to happen. But again, we run into situations where it's the marital home. They have to sell the house to move on. There's children involved. And when you're divorcing and someone's in and out of the house and the house just becomes a disaster.
Well,
So it's
right.
really important to just achieve the common goals. What I'm saying is of getting the home sold and understand that that's your most expensive asset you're probably selling. So it's the one thing you should probably get along about.
And you got to watch that deferred maintenance and those kind of things because I suppose that if two people are selling a house and the idea is let's get as much money out of it so we can build our next house together, that's a very different relationship than two people who now hate each other, want to go their separate ways, and it's essentially a liquidation sale. In other
What it
words,
is.
they're just they're turning their assets into cash and they want to cut and run. And so you might not get the willingness to put in money, for example, to put in that, those cabinets that are broken and replace them or fix that roof. And you might have resistance in that.
Well, the resistance is where the stress comes in, and
Yeah.
a lot of times it's everybody getting on the same page, and I see a lot of money get left on the table when in these divorce situations where people just you don't have to get along or like each other, but you should work towards this common goal because ultimately that's probably where most of your proceeds and most of the money you're going to get to start your new chapter in your life is going to come from. So take a little time, invest back into that. This your one last and really, if you ever built a house with a spouse or done anything, it's high level stress anyways. So get it fixed up, do what you got to do, get it sold. And I think that's really what everybody needs to focus on is that common goal.
Truer words were never said. Let me ask you this. Do you have buyers who look for those kinds of houses that might have some minor deferred maintenance, but it's a divorcing couple and they think they'll get a better deal that way?
Well, the answer is yes. There's a wise man once told me there's a butt for every saddle, right?
Yeah,
So with that being said, when you're looking for those types of buyers do exist out there, but they're often looking for a little bit more of a deal and a situation to take advantage of. And that's often it can be done. A lot of times when you have a marital home, we're seeing most of the situations I seem to be dealing with through divorce, especially when it's bitter, is when there's children involved. And often it's
yeah,
a family home. And when you have a family home and you have children involved, the next buyer is probably going to be looking at this as a family home as well. And when you're showing signs of a broken home by having a house that's broken all over the place,
sure,
it doesn't give the same level of hit you in the feels when you walk in the door and go, this is
sure.
exactly what we have been looking for. And so they might look past that to go to the next house. And again, those people that are smart and find the advantage will take advantage of you if you don't take care of your house. And that's
Right.
what happens
Very interesting.
without the right representation, without
And you know
Goldman Law.
what? Yeah, and I appreciate that because obviously the lawyers have the responsibility of giving guidance to their clients and telling them, look, this is what you got to do. And if you're going to not take care of this, you're not going to maintain the status quo. The judge is going to have something to say about that, and you're not going to like what he has to say. So it's true. The lawyers have to guard with that. I suppose another problem that might come up, it's not just deferred maintenance of the cabinets and the roof and stuff like that. What about situations where somebody all of a sudden decided not to pay the house payment? And now that we got a bank knocking on our door because there's a delinquency.
Well, and in today's environment with interest rates the way they are now, the foreclosure process, and we have some videos, and we'll probably link to some of our stuff below about the
Sure.
foreclosure process here in Michigan. But once you get into that situation where you have the bank knocking at the door, you're destroying your level of credit. A lot of times in these divorce situations, one party or both parties get very short-sighted on this battle between each other. But at the end of the day, there is a life after divorce,
Right.
and not having when you destroy your credit with having lates on your mortgage payments, you're not only hindering the opportunity for you to one buy another property because now your credit's shot. But even landlords are becoming extremely strict when they look at credit reports for you to move on to the next opportunity in your life. So when you have multiple lates on your credit report and you go apply for an apartment or a rental house or condo, that landlord is going to say, "Well, geez, you were late 4 times on your mortgage payment over the last year. I don't know if I want to rent you. Are you financially stable?" And you're going to go, "Oh, well, I was going through divorce and me and my ex hate each other, so it's okay." They're going to think twice about accepting you, and you might have to compromise on the quality of housing you choose next to start over with. You're already stressed, so why would you do that again? So,
Right.
I guess to reiterate as to what you're saying here is why do you want the banks and you don't want the banks and everybody knocking at your door? Yeah, it's going to destroy your credit. And then all of a sudden you start falling behind in payments. Those payments compound. And one of the eighth wonders of the world is compounding interest. And that's what starts happening when you start falling behind in payments in your equity situation, where a lot of people right now that at least were smart enough to buy a house in the last 10 years have a lot of equity. But if you let that get eaten up through foreclosure fees and forced place insurance and just delinquent payments, you're ultimately going to be kind of stuck in a rock and a hard place there where you're walking away with less money. So it's important to keep those mortgage payments paid.
Very. So let me ask you this. As a real estate professional, I take it sometimes you're presented with a deal or a client, and there's certain red flags that pop up, which may make you think, look, I'm going to have to really handle this differently, or perhaps not handle it at all because of the people and perhaps the lack of cooperation that you might see at the outset. Are there certain red flags that you look toward, or you want to make sure that do not exist so you can really help the people?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of red flags with real estate. One is first things first. I like to get even when you're in a probate situation or you're in a inherited property, and especially in divorce. I want to take a look at the current mortgage statement and see if we're current on payments. That's by
Oh,
far one of the most important things. That is a quick red flag because it lets me know how bitter this divorce is being because they can act one way at the table when we're sitting there signing, but when I walk away and they're bitterly arguing with each other and the payments aren't being made, financial stresses, I believe from what I understand, the number one cause of divorce. So when the payments aren't being made, there's foreclosure strain. That's usually a red flag that things aren't going right. And with that additional financial strain, we have a lot of people kind of fall into this. I don't know. They're stuck, and they need to get out of this. So that's a big red flag. Is not having the mortgage payments made. You also look at the deferred maintenance through the property too,
right.
and sitting down in the situations. I mean, I can tell you, for instance, I sat down with a divorce that was literally literally just closed out the other day. The judge had signed the divorce decree. Everything was done. He had 30 days to get the stuff and get out of the house. And I'm sitting at the listing appointment with the wife that had inherited the house. And she was like, "Hey, I'm looking to sell this. It has too many bad memories. I got the house. I bought him out, whatever. We're going to move on to the next property." We sit down at the table and he's beating down the front door. This is a nice $600,000 house in a nice community in Macomb County. And he's beating down the front door, screaming, cussing, and the cops get called.
Oh,
We're sitting there.
wow.
So these things can get really, really ugly. So those are red flags that we look out for. We don't want to deal with those situations. Fortunately, that woman was past the whole process here and she had, offload the property. But to answer your question, the red flags we're looking for is we're just looking for the deferred maintenance and the mindset of the seller.
Let me ask
Where's
you
their mind at?
Let me ask you a follow-up question about that because you said something interesting about the police coming. Are you finding because a lot of times when somebody's banging down on a door in this day and age, somebody's making a scene. You know what happens? People pull out cell phones. Are you finding that there's social media where somebody's acting out with respect to a property and that does or maybe does not have an impact on the sale of a home? Like if I'm going to buy a house on 123 Main Street, I may go on YouTube and write 123 Main Street, and all of a sudden I'm going to see a video of that very house where, I don't know, there's a crime scene there or there's an assault going on there. Do you find that
And well,
is that impactful?
absolutely. So a lot of times you see in those types of situations is that we're properties on the open market. And just the way I look at it, there's the three
Sure.
best salespeople for your house. Okay. The first person is if I come to your house today and we're going to put the house on the market, you're the best salesperson for your house because you know everything about it. You're telling me everything about it. You know why it makes no sense. The second one's going to be the realtor that you hire. They're going to know everything you told them, hopefully regurgitate it the best. The third best salesperson for your house or the person that's going to really hinder the sale of your home are your neighbors. And if
Oh, wow.
your neighbors are watching your door getting beat down every day, smart home buyers sometimes go knock on the doors on both sides. Say, "Hey, can you tell me a little bit about the neighbors next door?" And if you're good with your neighbors, typically, "Oh, they were great. Bob and Cindy, they've been there 50 years. I hate to see them go." But if it's, "Yeah, please buy it. We don't want to deal with this anymore. It's craziness going on there. We don't know what's going on." So that's kind of where, that can hinder the sale. And also it doesn't look good on the neighborhood. The neighbors start questioning things and, nobody wants that in their own neighborhood. And unfortunately, we're all human beings and we're all emotional beings. So that
Sure.
seems to happen.
Wow. Now, let me ask you, in a custody situation where one person usually ends up with the kids, does that typically dictate who's going to want to keep the house and who's not? Or do you find that it's not necessarily the case?
Well, it comes down to an affordability issue. And a lot of times, if you're going to get divorced, you should probably talk to your mortgage lender first and see where your pre-qualifications fall. A lot of times, some people don't understand that in order to keep the marital home, you have to qualify to do a refinance to get the other spouse off the mortgage.
Right.
Is a lot of times we will go to get you can get out of a mortgage. You can still own the debt, but not own the house. And that is an extremely risky situation when people are moving, is where if there's an existing mortgage balance on the property, you can sign a quitclaim deed and remove one spouse. Doesn't mean you did release yourself from the debt. You can't sign a quitclaim deed to remove yourself from debt. So a lot of times when that debt is not removed from your credit report, one person's moving out saying, "Okay, I'm starting a new life. I need to buy another property with my new spouse or whatever I'm going to do." Well, guess what happens? They can't qualify because they still own the debt on the house. They go, "Oh no, my ex has that house. That house is in their name." No, the debt's in your name.
In other
And
words,
that
the bank is not a party to your divorce.
they
So,
don't care.
you may say, I'm giving you the house, goodbye and good luck. But if you signed as a guarantor that you're paying that mortgage, you're still on the hook. And
It's
and and so that becomes a very important point that you just made.
Well, it seems to be common practice in terms of it's a quick way to move parties on and you feel a little better in the moment, but not being released from that debt causes some issues. So a lot of times, and again, to circle back to what you were saying about having children involved in the divorce, who keeps the house and who doesn't keep the house, it's kind of a big deal when you really break it down. And I see that the person that is going to have custody of the children, they might want to keep the marital home, but they might not be able to afford the marital home. And that is a lot of times it comes back to where you guys might say, "We're going to have to liquidate the property because so and so cannot refinance to take on the burden of the payments, especially in today's interest rate environments." And this is where it gets really complex now. If you get in a divorce situation, there may have been financial strain. There may be a first mortgage on the property when you bought it.
Right.
You may have pulled a second out to put the pool in to save the marriage. Whatever you were going to do to buy a new car, do some expensive upgrades, trying to do these things. What happens is all of a sudden you have two lines of debt on this house. You owe too much, so someone needs to refinance. Well, you bought that original property at a 3.5% mortgage rate. Now you want to refinance at 7,
Wow.
and you're only using one income. The other person doesn't qualify. So a lot of times it just makes sense because in divorce, a lot of times it is a step backwards for everybody to just offload the asset, take the cash, and move on to where you can afford next. And that just seems to be a good way to go because then you don't have the kids with unstable housing, and you have to think about the kids in this because they're ultimately the ones that are probably the most impacted.
And that's interesting because what we're really saying is that the real estate market is going to play such a role in the decision to sell or keep the marital home because of affordability of being able to go on with it or not. And somebody's got to stay and somebody's got to go. And the exit strategy might not work if the other person can't qualify for a 7% mortgage, even though they may have qualified for a 3%.
Yeah, yeah, that's you nailed it on the head.
And that's exactly what it is. Well, I'll tell you, Brett, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate all the insight that you shared. Divorce and real estate are complicated, and having the right professional involved surely makes a difference. Now, before we wrap up, just for anybody who's watching who may need help with buying or selling a house during a divorce or not, tell us, Brett, how can they best reach you?
The best way to always reach me is office@knybelnetwork.com. That's OFFICE at knybelnetwork.com, KNYBEL network.com is the best way to reach out. Shoot us an email. Let us know exactly what your situation is, where your property's at. We can always get back to you as quick as we can. Or you could always call us on the phone, 586-421-1571 for anyone who has any questions that needs help with moving on from there. So
And that would
thank
be
you for having
buying
me
or
today.
selling, right, Brett?
Buying or selling. A lot of times in these divorce situations, you have somebody that needs to sell, and sometimes both parties need to buy again. So it's
Right.
having somebody involved, all that documentation when you get through to the divorce, all of that, having somebody that's trusted on your side and has some experience with divorce. You can call your cousin that sells real estate too. They can help you out. And you might save your Thanksgiving dinner working with your family member. It's always awkward seeing them at Thanksgiving if you didn't use them.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're not experienced in these types of situations. So it's good to have a third party, unbiased opinion to get you from start to finish because our job is to draw the emotion out of the transaction, which a lot of times with real estate is very emotional. It's a
Absolutely.
big experience. It's one of the top three stressors, I believe, moving is for anybody. So taking your time to have the right professional in your court, I think really goes a long way. And kind of take the emotion out of the sale process. And then when you start over fresh, it's a little more fun when you're high fiving and moving on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's terrific. Lastly, if anybody has any further questions, of course, you can always call or text us here at the office at 248-590-6600. You can do that right now. Thank you all for watching.